My name's John Bianchi. I'm the Airbnb data guy. I want to tell you my story about how I became the Airbnb data guy. I know it may seem like a weird title, but there was quite a process that got me to the point of actually being known as the Airbnb data guy. So, more so, I actually kind of want to tell you a little bit about how I got into Airbnb and then also my real estate journey along that time period. My journey's not done, but I'm at a certain point where I feel like I can share some of the insights that I've had. And so that's what this is about. So I hope you enjoy it. Back in the day, so we're talking like 2016, 2017 at this point, I used to be a financial advisor. So my job was to sit down with people, look at their retirement funds, and tell them how to allocate their money across different mutual funds for the best risk adverse strategy that was going to allow them to make sure that they didn't run out of money and make sure they didn't have to pay a crazy amount of taxes and make sure that everything was set up in the right accounts. And it was unbelievably boring. I could not stand it after a while, and I genuinely was searching for a way out, but I did not know what that was going to be. And I had a lot of ideas. So I've just always had this like entrepreneurial bone in me. And I wanted to be able to find a different business that I could start that was going to allow me to scale, that, continue to scale. There would be no limits to what I could potentially do with the business. Whereas with the finance business, it was very limited by the number of clients that you could handle. And so that was one of the requirements I was looking for. But additionally, I wanted a business that was going to be more fun. You know what I mean? Something that was better than going into an office and sitting at a table and, telling the person across from the table about the mutual funds that we're deciding to put them in and why we're deciding to do that, while they stare back at you and they do not care or they do not know what you're saying. And they want to get out of that meeting as much as you want to get out of that meeting. And so I wanted something that was going to create a little bit more adventure in my life. And what I ended up ultimately landing on was Airbnb, which, may sound crazy to some people and may make total sense to a bunch of other people. It ultimately ended up making a ton of sense to me, right? Now, I don't remember my buddy's backyard, and I was with his parents. He was there, a couple other friends were there, and I was downloading it and telling him like, yeah, I'm going to give this Airbnb thing a shot and kind of see what happens, right? Fast forward, 7, 8 years, and I'm the Airbnb data guy. So obviously that was a good decision to make. You never know which decision is going to be your best decision, right? But regardless, anyways, what I'm trying to get at is that I downloaded this app. And the reason I did it was because I had a spare room. I was living with my brother. He moved out. I had an extra room. I'm like, let's download Airbnb. Let's give this thing a shot, right? Luckily, that was a really easy threshold for me to be able to get through to just try this Airbnb thing. Now, ultimately, it was cool when I first got started. It was an absolute shit show when I also first got started, right? The cool part was like I was making a little bit of extra money. But when I first got started, I did it so poorly that I actually had to move back in with my parents for 2 weeks because I had rented out my entire place, but I didn't want a bad review. And so I made sure that people got exactly what they wanted and I didn't make it a bad experience for them. And then I changed everything so that the future guests just got their private room. There was no more than like 2 people, blah, 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 blah. Right. But what I find actually most interesting when I look back on that experience was that it wasn't until the end of one of the summer months, which must have been July. It must have been the end of July, where I was the most excited about Airbnb. And the reason being was because I made more money than my rent. So at the time, I think I was paying about $700, and I think I made around $1,200 on Airbnb rent by renting out that spare room, which was a big deal at that point. Okay, which was a very big deal. It was more of an eye opener than really a big deal. But I loved this idea that I didn't have to pay my rent, and I also loved the idea of making extra money. I was like, this is so cool. I'm like, because you feel it in your finances, you feel it in your savings. Like you look back at that month and you're like, wow, I actually have so much more money left in my account, especially back then at that time period, right? And so it was this eye-opening moment, and that was really the spark that I needed. So obviously there's an initial downloading of it and getting it going, but there's that little bit of success that I had, which made me so much more intrigued into this. And this is where I go deeper, right? So this is where I start to really get into the weeds of everything. And I start to read every single article I can find about Airbnb and learn what other people are doing. And what I find out is that there's a lot of other people who are opening more than just one Airbnb, right? At the time, I just thought you could only open up one. And then I learned there's people opening up 20 or 100. And I was just thinking to myself, like, that's a business that can infinitely scale, sort of. You know what I mean? And and it's interesting, and it was fun, and it was around vacations, and I'm obsessed with vacations, or have been. It's just such a great time in life is when you're on vacation, right? And so, to be a part of that industry was interesting to me. And it just, everything sounded so much better than what I was currently doing at that time. And so I decided that I was going to try to open up another one of these. And at that point in time, I learned about rental arbitrage, right? And rental arbitrage is the idea of renting out somebody else's place, throwing your own furniture in there, and then putting it up on Airbnb and hoping that you're going to make more money on Airbnb than the rent that you're paying to the landlord. Now, I didn't do it in the greatest way to start off, right? So rented out a place in Detroit above the Nike store. It was right downtown, super cool spot. 2 stories, lofted, spiral stairs, super cool, right? But I didn't tell the landlord that I was planning on Airbnb-ing it because I was an idiot. I was stupid. I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. And I talked about it with somebody else. And, we decided ultimately we were going to move forward with not telling them and just, seeing where we would go from there. In under a month, they found out and they sent us an eviction letter. And then we reached out to them. We're like, hey, can we rent this out midterm? Would that be allowed? Right. And ultimately, they're like, yeah, you're fine. You can rent it out midterm. Just don't rent it on Airbnb. And we're like, okay, fine. We agree. Okay. So moving forward, well, there's one of the best lessons. The next Airbnb that I got, told the landlord exactly what I wanted to do. He loved this idea of a young guy who was just trying to build up this business, and he wanted to be a part of that. And, he let me rent out his home on Airbnb, and it ultimately, got my feet a little bit more wet, right? Like I went further into this journey of figuring out these Airbnbs. Now at this time, I knew that I could open up these Airbnbs. I understood how to get the furniture in there, how to talk to the landlords. And I thought I understood how to look into the data to be able to find good properties. I had no idea what I was doing. I can look back at those times and honestly say I had no idea what I was doing, right? But it gave me the confidence to believe that there was something there. And I could see the money coming in, and I could tell that this was something that was going to be possible to scale, right? Now, keep in mind, I was still a financial advisor at this time. I had not left that day job / day business. And I really wanted to get out of it. However, I did not have enough money to be able to scale this business infinitely like I wanted to. And so I knew that if I was going to leave that business, my 9-to-5 financial business, I needed to actually raise some money to be able to scale this business, to get it to a point where it could support me and support whoever those investors were, so that I could continue to move forward and grow this business. And so this is where I got to the point where I had to take it really seriously, and I had to dive into the numbers a little bit more, right? And, AirDNA was the main tool that I was using at that time, and is still the main tool that I was using now. And if you don't know what AirDNA is, just go and look it up. It's the best Airbnb tool out there for understanding Airbnb data, right? But what I did at this time period is really what defined me, I would say. I didn't realize it at the time, but it is definitely one of these interesting things. So what I had to do was get far more serious about how I was looking at the data to be able to identify a profitable property. Because if I was going to use somebody else's money to scale my business, I had to make sure that the property I was going to get was actually going to make money and not lose money. Because if it lost money, I lost the investor's money. And so this required me to hone in on this Airbnb data and try to understand it as best I possibly could. And so I spent a lot of time looking into the data, trying to find where the most profit was going to be made, trying to see where a lot of revenue was being made. And I was open to anywhere in the United States. I was just trying to see where across the United States would be the best place for opening up a property. And what I had thought I had figured out was that Florida was going to be it. Florida, there was tons of money being made. The rent wasn't, a crazy amount. And so there was going to be profits that I could make if I just went down to Florida. And I thought I had it all mapped out. I went down to Siesta Key. Now, you have to keep in mind, this is a really big deal for me because I'm a Canadian. Florida is a 24-hour drive from where I live, and I drove down there to start this Airbnb business. Now, keep in mind as well, I also had to leave this business that I've been building up over the last 3 years, right? So from the age of 21 to 24, I had built up this finance business from zero to managing $10 million. My business partner was managing $90 million. I literally had my name on the door. I had my own assistant. Everything was peachy at the time. And I walked away from that. And then I drove 24 hours away from my hometown. And I had raised money from individuals from my hometown as well that I respected a lot, right? I expected them a lot. And I had to try and make it work down in Florida. And one of the main things that I overlooked was the regulations in Florida and how difficult it was going to be to make it work in Florida in comparison to anywhere else, right? Without getting into too much details, essentially, I didn't understand the regulations in Florida in the towns that I was planning on going into. I also did not understand that, you know, everybody in Florida understands vacation rentals really well, and they have for decades because people have been renting out vacation rentals in Florida for a very long time. And so when you approach them for this, they actually are so educated on it that they didn't really want to do it. That's not 100% the case. I just struggled with it. And it's mainly because I'm not a great salesman, right? I'm a terrible salesman. I'm great at making relationships and, you know, getting to know people well. But when it comes to trying to make that sale, I'm not that great at it. I just really am not, right? And so I struggled like crazy because in Michigan, it was like this bright new idea and it was so cool to people and they're intrigued by it. And no one had really known any of the pros and cons of what to expect. And then I get down to Florida and they're like, get out of here. You're not renting my home out to these vacationers, right? Especially down in 2017. Again, definitely still possible. I know tons of people that do rent out properties down in Florida. I just struggled with it. So between regulations and not being able to get somebody to rent out their property, I was struggling, without a doubt, struggling hard. Okay. To the point where I actually spent a month going to multiple different cities across Florida to try to make this work and analyzing data from market to market to market. So I thought that Siesta Key was going to be it. Right. And then I get there and they're like, yeah, you can't rent out like any of these homes. And then you don't really have any other option. And I was like, shit. All right. Well, where do I go from here? Because all I had done was study Siesta Key. I like tried to understand it like the back of my hand, right? At that time. And so I'm like, okay, I have some understanding of this other area that's not too far away, Clearwater, Florida. Went up a little further. Tried to study Clearwater Beach and then Indian Rocks Beach, you know, this whole area. Studied it, failed again. Regulations didn't allow for it. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to Miami. And so I drive across Florida to Miami and try to make it work over there. You guys have to keep in mind, I have almost no money at this time. And I don't want to take any of my investors' money because that money is supposed to go towards getting these properties up and running. So I'm taking tiny little bits of money to make this work. And then on top of that, I'm also almost living out of my car, like genuinely living out of my car. I had everything kind of in there. I was going from like hostel to Airbnb, like these little gross places I was staying at because they're just dirt cheap. I was living off of like peanut butter sandwiches and Pringles. Yeah, I'm down in Florida. I'm trying to make this business work, but like I was scraping by. Okay. I've got like horror stories. Like if you really want to get into it one day, we can talk about it down in Miami. But I get down to Miami and, you know, I try to make it work in Miami for like another week. That means analyzing the data like crazy, trying to figure out where to go, trying to figure out, you know, where exactly I should be, trying to find the properties that I could rent, talk to these landlords, and I'm trying my best to make it work. Maybe I didn't give it enough time, right? Maybe I really didn't give it enough time, but it was not working. And I knew that it was not working. And so I'm not kidding. I woke up one day. It had been like just over a month of this Florida circus. And I call up the investor early in the morning and I go, hey, Florida's not going to work. I'm tried. You know, I've been talking to him daily about all the updates and I go, it's just not going to work. Okay. And they're like, yeah, I agree. We need to regroup. We need to figure this out. And so hung up that phone and just started driving back north, driving back home and going, it is what it is. And that day, I can't remember how many hours I drove, but it was a lot. It was a lot of hours that I drove. It was not a happy day, right? In my mind, I had just failed. I had told these guys that we're going to be able to make it down Florida. All of this research says it's going to be able to work, right? I convinced myself it's going to work. I go and do everything I can to try and make it work. And ultimately, I'm like, it's not going to work. I'm run out of money. I have to go home and I have to try and get back. And I get all the way back home. I've given up my apartment. I'll go back in with my parents at this time. And, it wasn't a very long time. I wasn't giving up, but I didn't know where to go next. And so in that time period, I started thinking to myself, if I pick another market that's really far away, that's going to kick my ass again. Let me try something a little closer to home. And that was Ann Arbor, right? So I go, let me make this Ann Arbor, try and make our Ann Arbor work, study all the data, try and figure it out. This is where actually we learned one of my biggest lessons about good and bad data. All right. So I looked into Ann Arbor. I found these two, the data said that you can make tons of money, over $100,000, almost $150,000 on these properties. I thought it was going to be amazing. I found these two properties right across from the big house in Michigan where they play their football games. And they were going to cost me $7,000 a month. These new builds, absolutely beautiful. It's like, these things will absolutely crush on Airbnb. I'm going to make money hand over fist. And and then I ended up talking to somebody and telling them about that. He literally like almost laughed in my face. He goes, "There's no way in hell Airbnbs make that much money in Ann Arbor. I'm telling you." He's like, "There's something wrong." And I was like, "No, the data clearly says that it's going to work." But I had some doubt now, and I go, "Okay, well, let me look into this a little more, right?" And so I go back to the data and I look at these homes that are making the amount they're making. I try to think to myself, how could I prove that they're actually not making this amount of money? Like what could possibly be wrong? And that's where I learned all these lessons between good and bad data. And what I found out was that these homes were actually just renting out their home for the weekends where there were home football games, right? And then they would close off their calendar the rest of the time. So they're only renting out their home for 8 weeks out of that time period. But AirGNA in their algorithm was thinking that they were actually getting this home rented out like crazy throughout the entire year, because when the host would block off the calendar, it would actually show up as a booking on AirGNA. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details of good and bad data, but that was a huge lesson. So I walked away from these two leases because I knew that was going to be a gigantic mistake. And I learned a huge lesson at that time. And so during this time period, right, I'm at home and I'm just ripping through data and I'm trying to find this next market. I'm going and I'm just constantly looking from city to city and, starting off with the regulations, trying to understand the regulations and trying to understand the data. And I don't know why, but Chicago never crossed my radar. And Chicago is only 5 hours from my hometown. And I remember being out with my friends, one weekend, and somebody was like, "Yeah, I'm from Chicago." And I'm not kidding you guys. Genuinely, light bulb moment. Like my brain lit up. It just absolutely lit up. I've never felt a light bulb moment more than that one where I was like, holy shit, Chicago. That's not too far. That's a big city. It probably could work. I went home that next day and studied everything about Chicago and tried to understand it. And I wrote all the data out on a piece of paper. And I eventually figured out that, yeah, Chicago has profitability, right? Between the rent and the amount that you can make. If these numbers are true, and I've sorted through that bad data, I feel like I'm looking at this good data, I go, I think I can make it work here. And so I end up going like, I think it was the Saturday that I had the light bulb moment, the Sunday, Monday, I studied the data, I think even the Tuesday, and I'm pretty sure it was the Wednesday I took off to Chicago. I'm not even kidding you, it was that quick. So it was a 2-week turnaround from failure in Florida to taking off to Chicago. And when I took off to Chicago, that's where it all got going, right? So I get to Chicago, and Chicago has so many properties that are for rent because obviously it's a big city, right? And then on top of that, it's not like Florida where not everybody knows about Airbnb, and it's not like this known things where they know the pros and the cons and what to avoid and whatnot. They're intrigued by it as well, and they're open to it as well. And it's this new thing that maybe it could work and maybe it sounds great and all this different stuff. And so it's actually a lot easier to talk to these landlords. And for somebody who's not good at sales, having somebody who's easier to speak with is where I need to be. You know what I mean? Unless I hire somebody to do the sales for me, that's where I need to be. And so I actually ended up closing, I think it was 3 landlords, three properties. So it was 2 landlords and one landlord had 2 properties within the first, I want to say 10 days that I was there. So within the first 10 days, I got 2 landlords to give me 3 properties. And the cool thing about it was that actually each property I got 2 weeks apart. So I had a 2-week timeline on each one of these properties to get. Now, I had done a lot of research at this point, okay? And from researching the entire country originally to figure out which market I wanted to go into to decide down in Florida, and then all of the research that I had done in each one of these Florida markets, and then all of the research I did in Ann Arbor, which led me to that bad data understanding, and then the research I had done for Chicago, I had done this over and over and over again, where at a point where I was like, I feel like I got a really good understanding of this. And so when I got these properties that I got, I very specifically selected these ones, not just because the landlord said yes, but because they met my buy box criteria. I knew that those homes had the potential to be profitable based off of their location, their bedrooms, their bathrooms, the extra stuff like their backyard, their views, whatever it was, right? It had some sort of ability that was actually going to allow it to drive revenue. And I can still remember sitting on the call with my investors, showing them the data, and we're sitting there, we're like, I think it's going to work. Like if we look at these homes, like if we think these homes are doing this much, I don't see why we wouldn't do that much, you know? And if we designed it a little better, I think we can do this, right? And this is back in 2018. And I'm like, I think we can do this. I think we can do it. And we weren't 100%, but we took the risk and we said, let's pull the trigger. And we signed the leases and we got them going, right? Now, this is where all of that hard work really came together, and all of that struggle and doubt started to come to life, because once I got the property up and running and then I listed it on Airbnb, we were headed into the summertime, which was an absolute blessing in disguise. We were heading into the summertime, and each property got enough rented out to cover the rent for every single month for the next like 4 months, I think it was, right? So I put the property up on Airbnb, and then we got all these future bookings, which covered at a minimum the rent for each one of these properties. And we still had a ton of days that still were needed to get booked. It was an absolute win that was needed at that moment. And it was the turning point, right? The turning point where we're like, holy hell, this could work, right? Holy hell, we have these properties. They're bringing in money. It was amazing. Okay. It felt great. It felt so good. And then they ended up, we run them, and like, they start going, and you actually can see their true track record. So before we're like, we just hope it works, but now we're actually seeing that it's working. And those original properties were all very profitable, and so profitable that I actually got highlighted on multiple different, Airbnb gurus, coaching classes. They brought me in. They're like, how did you find these properties that are, making X amount every single year, or projected to make that amount, right? And we also had enough cash flow come in that we could open up more properties. And I knew I had done something right, I guess. And all of that work had like really built up to that point. And so from that point on, it was like, let's just repeat this, right? Let's just keep doing what we're doing and make it better. And so what we had done was open up more properties. And then we learned about property management, right? That you can just rent out somebody else's property, or somebody else can put up all the furniture to want to put their property up on Airbnb, but they don't want to manage it. They don't know how to manage it. They don't know how to market it. They don't know the pricing. You can come in and do all of that for them because you know how to do all that stuff, and they'll pay you a fee to do that. And so we learned that was actually another way to scale the business as well. And so we, started doing rental arbitrage. We started doing management. And then ultimately we learned that getting a cleaning company was going to be a great idea to be able to drive additional revenue, bring in a full-time employee, and help run the entire business. And so at the peak of it, right, we had about 15 properties out of Chicago between rental arbitrage and property management. And for anyone listening to this, we are going to get to the point where I talk about buying properties, and that's, a big focus nowadays. But we did those two. And then I got a couple down in Scottsdale, Arizona. I got a couple, I had the ones over in Michigan as well. And, had the cleaning company, and we had all of these things. And I remember I did a projection on how much are we going to make going into this peak season, right? Because we were headed into the summer of 2020 in Chicago. And I remember being in like January and February. I'm like, what should I expect us to make? And we should have made, it was, I think the exact number was 263,000 during that time period. Now we would have to put some of that into reserves. We ultimately would have been close to about $200,000 in profit, which would have paid back my investors very nicely. Would have gave me some additional money, would have allowed us to open up more properties, would have gave us great reserves. But for anyone listening to this, you put two and two together, it's 2020. So March of 2020 comes around, and April, and every single last booking that we had disappeared. And all of a sudden, we went from about to make a whole whack load of money to having $35,000-ish of monthly expenses that we had no revenue to cover. And so it was an absolute shit show for my business at that time. And we had to get every single one of those properties rented out. So, we subleased each one of those properties as fast as we possibly could, try to give these people great deals. And luckily, we were able to get all of them rented out within at least a month. I think there was only one property that took over a month. And then, the people who had the property management contracts, they were taking on all the risks, such as paying the mortgage. And they were kind of okay with like covering their own scenario at that time period. So we didn't necessarily lose those contracts, right? But we had no money coming through at all. And I think I hit a breaking point. I think I hit a breaking point where I was just over it. I was done. I was frustrated. I'd been building that business up for 2.5 years at that point, and thought it was going to be better. Had all the highest hopes in the world. Do I think it could have been a good business at the time? Sure, right? But I was looking for another change, which is, if you're trying to build up a really successful business, looking for a change every 2.5 years to 3 years is the quickest way to fail. Okay, let me just state that out loud. So I found somebody else that was actually willing to buy all of my contracts. They had an Airbnb business. It was still making money because some Airbnb businesses were still making money depending on where you were located during 2020. I ended up selling off all the contracts to that individual, and they bought the business out. I was able to pay back the investors, not 100% in full, but a good portion of it. I still carry that weight with me every single day. I hate that fact, but it is a reality, right? And I essentially just walked away from that business, right? There was a couple things that I learned through that process. One was that I'm not great with operations. I'm not. And I'm not an operations genius. I'm not great at figuring out how to automate everything perfectly and being able to scale very easily and quickly. I could figure it out, and I did figure it out. I mean, 15 Airbnbs is not a crazy number, especially for some people who have like 200 to 3,000. But, it's a decent number that still takes quite a bit of operations to handle, right? But I knew I wasn't going to be the biggest and baddest like I wanted to be. For whatever reason, I want to have a business that continue to scale for as long as it possibly can, that I can be very, very proud of. And it was a tough lesson at the time for sure to lose everything that I had built up. And at this point, I had built up 2 businesses that ultimately didn't really lead to too much. And I actually decided to focus on a different industry altogether. Thought maybe I could, try my hand at renewable energy, see what I could do over there, which ultimately was just a waste of time. However, even though I had sold off my business, there was one thing that happened that was the greatest blessing in disguise. I had a lot of people who started to reach out to me about my process for analyzing Airbnb data to find the properties that I found. Because like I had mentioned, I had been highlighted by, a few different gurus out there that talked about my stories of analyzing the data to find the properties that I found and how profitable they ended up being, right? And they were, other people that were reaching out to me that had either been referred to me or heard about my story, and they were saying like, hey, could you actually help me with the data? Could you help me find a property? Can you help me understand how you understand it? Can you do something along those lines? And so what I realized was that I could actually do the one thing that I was best at, which was analyzing the Airbnb data, and help other people in that scenario to help them find profitable properties. And it was a very small idea at the very beginning, right? It was just this little thing where I had no idea how you could turn that concept into an Airbnb business, but I knew that there were people that wanted some help out there, and I knew that I could help them ultimately, right? And so what I did was anybody and everybody that reached out to me, I helped them however I could. And I also started to learn what the common patterns were that they were needing help with. And then I made a little course because I thought I was going to, be a course seller. And I made a little 2.5 hour course, realized it was not worthy of selling. And I put it on YouTube for free, which ultimately built a little bit more credibility and had more people reach out to me. And so now I have, a decent amount of people who are reaching out to me, but not enough to actually be called a real business, right? Nor did I know where it was going to actually go. And I didn't feel extraordinarily confident that I could actually help people with what they wanted. I knew that I had done decently well, but with the way that it all ended, I didn't have the confidence that I wanted. And this is where I had to take some advice from somebody that I respect very highly. And he said that one of the best ways to become an expert at what you do is to get a job doing the thing day in and day out so that you can hone in on those skills so that you can get really good at it. Now, being somebody who identifies as an entrepreneur, I did not want to get a job whatsoever, right? And so instead, what I did was I got a contract with a company that ultimately acted as a job, but it allowed me to hone in on my skill. And this was one of the most important pieces of my entire journey, was that I allowed myself to get this contract where I would spend all day, every day, analyzing Airbnb data to get better at my craft so that I could learn it inside and out and to be able to figure out how to help more people in the process with this, right? Because I can't tell people what to do unless I know how to do it really well and have actually taken that process and put it into practice over and over and over again. And so I ended up working with this company called TechVestor for 2 years after this Airbnb business, right? 2 years as the head of data, analyzing Airbnb data to help them find properties that they could purchase and turn into short-term rentals, right? In that 2-year time period, I wanted to hone in on my craft to get better, to be able to help more people. That was always the ultimate goal in the back of my head, right? But I had to prove once again that I knew what I was doing. And so now looking back at it and what we have done, I'm happy to say that I've helped them purchase over 150 properties in the past 2 years. And we're talking about, I'm in 2024 right now. So the past 2 years would have been 2022, 2023, 2024, kind of in that time frame. And we allocated $70 million into 150 properties. And every single last one of those properties is cash flow positive. Okay, let me just repeat that one more time. Every single property is cash flow positive. Now, for me, that is the biggest deal in the entire world. You have no idea how happy it makes me to know that we have not missed once on these properties, okay? And that my research and the process that I used on my Airbnb business in Chicago, and the same process generally that I used to analyze those Florida properties and the Ann Arbor properties, and all of those lessons that I learned along the way allowed me to be able to understand this data in a way where I could help allocate $70 million in every single last one of those properties, cash flows. That's the coolest thing. To think about all the struggles that I went through and all the lessons that I learned, and then taking all of those lessons and putting them to practice to make sure that I don't make the same mistakes that I made in the past, to be able to find these new properties. And it actually worked. I mean, like that's what we're aiming for, right? Like that's what we're all trying to do, is exactly that. And it just makes me really happy to know that, one, the process works. Two, all of these struggles were worth something at the end of the day. You know what I mean? All these lessons that I had to learn, and living out of my car and whatnot down in Florida, those are lessons that all ultimately led to something that actually worked out. Now, like I have said many times already, I knew in the back of my head that I wanted to improve on my skills so that I could help more people. I hated the idea that there were so many people out there that did not understand the data and were buying properties or renting properties that were never going to make money on Airbnb. I could see, based off of my process, I could see people making mistakes before they ever knew it, right? So someone would tell me like, yeah, I got this property and I'm hoping it's going to make money. I look at it, and if I know the data for that market, I go, they'll find out in about a year to two that property is never going to cash flow for them. And there's not much you can do at that time period because they've already bought the property or rented the property and bought all the furniture for it. And you can't talk them out of it almost ever. And I've had multiple scenarios where I told people it was not going to work. They did not believe me. 2 years later, they come back to me and they say it did not work. And I go, I'm sorry to hear that, right? It is what it is. I'm sorry to hear that. Lesson learned. That's their own journey that they're going through, right? With all that being said, okay, I wanted to be able to provide something to everybody, like I've said. And so I've been working with this company, TechVestor, for 2 years, but I gained so much knowledge, but it was only going to them. And I wanted to create a way that it could go to everybody. And I wanted to create a business that could continue to scale past just this TechVestor company, which I love dearly. But I knew that there was more to be done. And I knew my journey wasn't over. And as I've stated many times throughout this story, was that I wanted to be able to create a business that could scale infinitely and be able to continue to help more people. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up creating STR Search. And what STR Search does is finds properties for anybody who is looking to find a property to turn into a short-term rental. If you're looking to purchase a property, we find it for you. Now, here's how I ultimately built this out, was I wanted to make sure that everybody had the option to do this. And so to launch this service, to just like put it out there to people to say like, hey, I can do this for you. I didn't want them to not have the option to do it themselves because again, I'm not a great salesman. And so if somebody can do it themselves, but they want to hire us, that's a very easy conversation for me to have. And so for that to happen, what I needed to do was actually give away my entire process. And so I spent most of 2023 creating a 40-hour long course that teaches every single last step of my process that I used to help TechVestor buy those 150 plus properties. Every single last step, how I analyze the markets, how I find the markets, how I figure out what's the absolute best thing to buy within that market, how I build out buy boxes, how I underwrite the properties, how I knew how to maximize the revenue out of the properties, how do I know how to allocate the money into which amenities, how to know which demographic to focus on. All of these things I had stored up and learned in my brain and became my own little expert on. And I put it all into a course and I gave it away for free. And I gave it away for free because if I wanted to ensure that nobody bought an unprofitable property, I couldn't put a paywall behind it. But I also wanted to build up a business. And so my strategy here, my logic here was if I could build trust within the community by giving everybody all of my secrets. Here's the entire process. If you go through this process, you're going to figure out my secrets. If I give them all of that, I can build enough trust within the community for those who want me to do it for them. For those who don't have the time for them to do it themselves, they can reach out to me and say, hey, John, I appreciate you giving all this context and all this information, but I just don't have the time to do it myself. Can you do it for me? And then I could just simply go, yes, I can. I've created a service where I can do that for you. And that's ultimately where all of these struggles have led. And to me, it is like the coolest thing in the world to be able to do. I can't express that enough. It is the coolest thing in the world because this is where my journey has been leading me this entire time, right? The not wanting to be a financial advisor, to be bored out of my mind in that process, and wanting to build up this business and trying to build it up, but learning that I'm not great at operations and COVID coming and kicking my ass, right? But during that entire time period, trying to hone in on that skill of understanding the data as best I possibly can, and then taking it very seriously and going, if I am going to, be able to give people advice around Airbnb data, I need to become an expert, and therefore I need to work for a company where I can hone in on my skills. And now that I did that and I no longer have that exclusivity contract, I need to take this and give it to the masses, right? And give them this option and make sure that nobody else buys an unprofitable property. And that's where we are today, which is so cool to me. I love it. I know I'm getting overly excited, but I find it so cool. And I'm so happy that my journey has led me here because this is exactly where I feel like I should be. And this is exactly what I do best. And this is exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life, right? With those other businesses, the finance business, I remember when I started it, I'm like, I can maybe do this for 3 years. When I started the Airbnb business, I'm like, let's see where we get in 2 years. That's the dumbest thing in the world. When I started this, I was like, I could do this to the day I die. But I only know that because of everything that I went through. And so ultimately, all these struggles and all these things that people go through lead to something amazing at the other end if you don't quit. There's a great saying that says, the only way to lose is to quit. And I believe that so wholeheartedly. And I will never quit. Whatever it is, I will never quit. Even if everything goes to shit, which I'm assuming it will as time goes on, because that's life. I will not quit, right? But ultimately, this is where we're at. So that's my journey, guys. That's my story. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it insightful. If you have any questions about it, throw a comment down there. There's so many other little stories I'd love to tell in between all of this that ultimately I'm not able to tell. But yeah, let me know. If you liked it. I want to be able to share more of my journey as I continue to go on. I want to share more. I want to share the good, but I want to share the bad, and I want to share these lessons I learned along the way, because ultimately I think they're going to help someone or some people. And there's something inside of me that finds that very rewarding. I love building businesses. I love adding value. And I love the content creation side of it because it allows me to share my insights, and those insights help other people. But I'm not doing it for an altruistic reason. I just find it very interesting to share my insights with you guys and with you specifically, because it allows me to hone in on what I'm doing and get better at it. And then it also allows me to get feedback from you. And if I'm doing something that doesn't make logical sense or could be done better, you can help me, right? And even though I'm not talking to you directly, we're not sitting in front of each other, we have this ability to do it this way. And I want to do more of that. And I feel like there's a lot of benefits to it. And so I want to do more sharing of my journey. And if you want more of that, please let me know. Just comment down below and be like, hey, made it to the end. I want to see more. And if you don't, comment down below. Say, hey, made it to the end. I don't want to see more. It's helpful to know if you guys want it or not. So anyways, appreciate you guys. I hope this is helpful. And if you need me to find you a property, reach on out.